Hello, everyone. I am here with a special guest, Iynna. She is an MBA student at Wharton in Pennsylvania, and she is from Cameroon and Madagascar. So welcome to the show, Iynna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, anytime. So before we dive into the topic of the day, why don't you give us a bit about your background in terms of where you're from and how you ended up getting to Wharton doing your MBA?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of a long story, so bear with me. I'll try to be quick. So as you rightly mentioned, I'm from Cameroon and Madagascar. So I was born and raised in Cameroon, grew up there until I was about 10, and we moved to Europe with my family. And I actually initially studied international affairs. So my whole purpose was to understand how the world operates and why some nations have done, economically, quote unquote, better than others. That was very naive in our thinking. But, as I moved forward in life, I started my career at the United Nations with that sole goal of trying to have an impact around the world. Did that for about a year. Realized that the UN was a great place, just not for me. So decided to, take a step back and rethink a bit more about what I wanted to do. My graduate research was actually around the role of technology for social change, particularly in conflict zones. So I was looking at the DRC and thinking about how we can use technology to really bring information to people on the ground. And so really became really fascinated by tech, moved back to Cameroon on a social enterprise. The goal was to start a social, sort of like a social enterprise around sanitation. And did that, wasn't fully ready to launch a business, so decided to come back to the US. But at that point, I'd caught the entrepreneurial virus. So started another company in education and tech, tried to raise money, couldn't do it. We'll dive deeper into that. But long story short, I became really interested in understanding, what was the whole sort of idea behind raising money. Why is it that I couldn't do it? And then got an opportunity to then run a social impact accelerator with Mohammed Yunus. And all the companies in my portfolio were struggling to also raise money for many different reasons. So became really fascinated by those questions, dove deeper in the subject, came across VC as an asset class, and then became, quite frankly, really interested in the whole idea. And so got into venture capital and then at an early stage accelerator program. Then did that for about 4 years and knew that I wanted to become a well-rounded investor, had all the operational skills. I'd run businesses before, I'd supported businesses, but how do I actually invest in them? So decided to go get an MBA, and then that's why I'm here now.
Fantastic. So why don't we dive a little bit deeper into that, actually? So you said that you didn't know how to raise money. What were some of those things that you didn't know? And like, what did you try and do to solve those things before you decided to do like a proper program to learn how to actually raise money or to, dive into VC straight on?
Yeah, so I didn't really know what I was getting into, to be honest with you. I mean, now that I think about it, I'm like, damn, I was crazy. Like, it's really hard. And I mean, you know that. And so I was, we had a business. I really believed into what we were doing. So just, one line on what we were doing, we're building essentially programs to provide STEM education and entrepreneurship education to underrepresented minorities. And so was very, it was very programmatic at the beginning, very non-profity. So we actually ended up pivoting to become a talent pipeline for big tech. So because we had all those, this community of students that frankly were completely overlooked by big tech. And so I was really bullish into our community and the things that we were doing. So I was like, well, it's a no-brainer. We're doing something good for society. It's going to help those families, those kids. It's going to help those companies. Like, why wouldn't you want to help us? And so I was going out there, initially what I was doing is really kind of going out there and really looking into who are sort of like impact focused investors, who are edtech investors, very, very pigeonholing our business. And so really thinking about, here is the mission, who can resonate with that? Let me go and talk to those people. And I had really, really nice conversation. I mean, I met some really amazing people who were really willing to help. But there's a difference between helping and actually giving you money. And that's a whole world. And so I realized that one thing that I did is I very quickly put our business in a category. Instead of thinking about, can we be a SaaS business? Are we more of a product? What are we? Really trying to kind of like broaden our mindset as to who we could actually go and talk to. So, going after edtech investors and edtech programs is fine, but when you kind of like go that route, you are quickly seen in a certain light. And at the time, also, when we think about impact investing, there was a lot more around, charity and philanthropy, which thankfully has changed now. But I think that really didn't help us that much. And I think the whole way I was going about that, I was younger as well. So I think this idea of, not necessarily discrimination against maybe younger people was very, very much there. And I was probably very oblivious to it. So I think, now that I look back, I definitely would learn from those lessons. And I try to tell all the founders that I'm talking to that, try to be as open-minded as you are, as you think about kind of the VCs that you want to go and talk to. And frankly, also think about, are you a VC-backed business? Like, are you actually, should you be going that route? Are there other ways for you to raise money?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And then obviously in terms of being ready to receive investments or to raise capital, there are two components. There's number one, do you have the skills to run a scalable business, which is what you kind of alluded to. But the second is, do you have the connections and the networks that can help you receive that funding? And so I wanted to touch a bit on both of those sides of the equation. So in terms of the skills, the hardcore skills of running a business and getting your pitch deck to be on point and speaking the lingo of VCs, how did you go about that? And then also, how did you go about developing your networks? And did you even need to develop a network to be successful in terms of raising or actually working in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I love the way you're breaking this down between the hard skills that, frankly, how can you run a business? Those are something that, you have it sort of like, DNA, and you can obviously, build those skills. I come from a liberal arts background. I studied international affairs. I'm very good at research, very good at, churning data from, pages of, of content. But when it comes to actually running a business, I didn't really know what I was doing, frankly. And so I really believed in our product. So I think that, when I tell founders that you really need to believe into what you're doing. And I think that sounds very cheesy, but it's very true, because if you don't believe, who else will? So I really believe into what we were doing. It was really hard, but I loved working with the students. That was kind of like one of the reasons that, I was frankly getting up out of bed every morning. But when it comes to actually building something that is scalable, I think we weren't quite there. Like I was mentioning to you, we had those programs that we were running in the form of after school programs, which is not at all scalable. This is something that you basically go out there and you teach students, and that's that. And you either are a good teacher or you're not. And so that was the piece around that I saw that, this was not going to be our Silicon Valley typical model. So we needed to do something there. And that's kind of like how we saw all those big tech companies that really were thinking about having more diverse talents. And we saw ourselves as, okay, well, we have all these students, we have all those talent that we actually training that could be potential employers at those companies. How can we be that bridge? And so we started looking around, other organizations, and most of them are nonprofits. And I was like, how can we step back from this whole nonprofit model to become an actual scalable business? And so eventually we ran a couple of pilots with a couple of those companies. So actually Google and Facebook were our very first, customers. That was really great in terms of giving us traction and credibility. But so, that was very much, based on, we had some connections working at those schools, and, in the DOE, we had a couple of contacts. There's also people on my team that had worked in that space before, so it wasn't really me. But when you kind of think about actual VCs, we had zero connection. There was really, I didn't even know where to go. I remember spending so much time on AngelList, F6S, know those websites in and out, and really trying to kind of like just cold outreach people. And, at the time, VCs are like, I don't want to be, cold outreach. Like, you can find me. And I started, really honestly stalking people. I would go to events. I would go and like catch people at the end of events and just trying to tell them like, hey, I would love to chat with you. I'm building this. And at the time, because we were building something that has some kind of a social impact, and people like to do good things, people felt like, okay, let me just go and have a chat with this woman. She's very annoying. Let me just go and talk to her, and because otherwise she's going to really like pester me. But ultimately, I was able to get meeting one, meeting two, and in those meetings, I was actually getting a lot of feedback, because I think people, generally speaking, were willing to help me. Coming back to the point around not giving me money, but at least helping me. So in that sense, yes, there was a great silver linings there, that I was able to not necessarily getting money, but at least building my network like that, because I really had known. So I feel like that really helped me in terms of like, networking my way through that.
Fantastic. So if we think about the specific feedback or skills or things that you needed to be able to raise that first time, what are 2 or 3 things that you think someone needs in order to have a proper conversation with a venture capitalist or with a source of funding? And what are the things they need to demonstrate in order to be able to raise capital?
Absolutely. So I've mentioned a bit about that. It's kind of like the whole passion. I'm almost not even going to mention that as a skill, because to me that's like a given. Like you need to actually somehow believe or love the problem that you're trying to solve. But very closely related to that is being able to answer the questions. And I don't mean in a way that is, very, obscure, but actually, if an investor is asking you, what is the size of the market? Answer the question, what is the size of the market? We don't need to know all the background around things. Like, it's fine, you can elaborate on that, but actually answer, the market is boom, boom, boom. And we came to that number because of X, Y, and Z. So I think that's something that is really, really important. Number one. Number two, also related to kind of like the whole business and all of that, really understand what is happening. Like, what is happening in the business? Why is that we believe that your solution is really going to be the right fit for the specific problem that we're trying to solve? Most of the time I see founders, addressing a huge problem that most people we are aware of. But we need to actually break down the problem to really understand how the solution itself directly addresses that. And so, to give you an example, for example, we were looking at, addressing the whole issue that, tech is not diverse. I mean, that's a very big problem. It's very known. I don't think it's a secret anymore. But how do we actually do that? So we were actually building a solution to inspire students to really understand how to build skill sets, a tech skill set, to be able to be employed at those companies. So it was basically an HR slash job upskilling type of business that we were building. It wasn't like an edtech type of thing. So really understanding what specifically your solution is trying to address. So I think that's really crucial. And lastly, which we have to talk about, that how do you plan to monetize? I think most of the time, especially early stage businesses, and rightfully so, are toying around multiple different revenue models and different avenues, and that's fine. But at least trying to have a plan around, here's what we're trying to do, and here's how we're testing out to see if it's actually working. And if it's not, let's move on to plan B. And so I think that that's really important for founders to really understand, especially not your typical kind of like SaaS business where SaaS models are very, predictable. But when you're trying to build, let's say, a community, something that we were trying to do, if you don't have a way to monetize, personally, you're not getting a second meeting with me, because I mean, to me, that's I don't want to say red flag, because that's a bit harsh, but it's a bit concerning.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so let's transition a bit into like your MBA program now. So what are you actually specifically learning that you're finding most valuable? I know that you can take classes on everything from valuations to finding product market fit and all those kinds of things, but what are some of those key things that you're learning that you wish you knew when you were first starting your business right now at the MBA program?
Absolutely. And I think one of the big reasons why I decided to go get an MBA, that was a question that many people sort of asked me. They were like, well, you already in VC, you're already doing all the good things like that you really want to do. Like, why do you need to get an MBA now? And I'm like, well, I really do like school. I mean, that's typical sort of like African immigrant problem that we love school. But no, jokes aside, I feel like I had all the operational skills. I mean, I know how to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty. Let's go and let's build things. Ultimately, I'd like to think that I'm a builder, but I was really lacking some of the financial skills that are frankly quite important, like, accounting, being able to read a financial statement. That's something that I did it when I was on the job running my business, but it wasn't a very sophisticated business. I mean, if you give me CBS financial statement, I wouldn't be able to understand what's happening. Thankfully, now I can, because I actually took classes around that. But so I think one of the big reasons why I was really attracted to get an MBA was, really getting that financial acumen. And I really specifically picked UPenn because the program is very quantitatively robust. And so that is a background that I don't have. And I really was hoping to, really feel those skills. And so now I'm really taking, I'm in my first year. I took a bunch of core classes, so anywhere from stats to econ classes, but also classes around sort of like private equity, VC in emerging market, which is something I'm really excited about. Some very straightforward leadership classes as well, which I think, we don't really teach us enough about how to be, how to actually be a leader. And I know you can build those skills on the job, but it's really helpful to actually have the framework behind it to really know what to do in specific situations. So I think that I'm really able to do that. And one piece as well that I'm really able to appreciate even more is that I'm also working as an early stage investor at Moxie Ventures, and being able to actually work and being in school has been extremely unique as an experience, because I'm really able to understand, how to actually do the job of an investor, like, on my day-to-day at Moxie, and then being able to put that back in context with the school, with my curriculum in school, and kind of like bringing all the things that I'm learning in the classroom on the job and vice versa has been really, frankly, even more uplifting. And I feel like I'm really sort of like building even more skills than I would have hoped to if I was only doing the MBA. So it's been great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so now that you're also on the other side, working as a venture capitalist, looking at people that are coming to you with pitch decks, what are some of the common reasons why you reject certain businesses? Or what have you learned being on the other side now, looking at maybe hundreds, if not thousands of decks that are sent your way, that you would recommend for our audience to learn from? Because we have a lot of founders that watch the show. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that you've noticed that would instantly get someone at least a review of their deck, or at least maybe that first meeting, or at least consideration compared to maybe the others that you don't look at?
Absolutely. So I think, and that goes back to my personal preferences and also kind of like what Moxie invests in. So our thesis is that we invest in companies and founders that are improving the way we live and work. So we're not an impact fund. However, we do like businesses that are actually, adding some kind of positive value to society. And that could mean, a whole lot of things. That could be businesses in fintech, healthcare, climate tech. We've done a bunch of deals, future of work, edtech, so on and so forth. So I think that if the business fundamentally is somehow adding some kind of positive value, that could be adding value to, saving lives, but that could also be, making salespeople jobs easier. So, very different type of impact that we're talking about here. So I think that's the number one. That's something that I really care about. I'm also really excited when I see founders who have some kind of experience in business that they're trying to solve. So, for instance, at least someone would get a first meeting with me if, let's say, they're building something that I had a founder that was, building a mobility business, trying to understand how it was mobility / logistics. So really thinking about how, improve sort of like delivery systems in the US, especially during COVID, e-commerce really boomed. But this founder had worked for many years, in an e-commerce business, and later on has worked directly, with USPS, and both as an employee, but also as someone who has used the service, as many of us have, and so really saw some of the challenges and really the gaps. And so once again, come back to that question of like, what kind of unique insights do you have as a founder that the rest of us don't? So how can you educate us? And when I say us, it's us, your investors, but also your customers, your users, and so on and so forth. So I think that's really exciting to me. And yeah, frankly, am I excited about the business? And personally, I love unsexy tech. I love things that are being completely overlooked. So things around manufacturing, infra, how do we improve, safety of workers on oil rig or factories and things like that. That to me, that's really exciting. Mobility, I've mentioned. So I think that to me is really cool. I mean, now we see a lot of things, Web3, the metaverse, are things that are very much in everybody's mouth. I'm still, honestly trying to educate myself around that, because I'm trying to kind of like wrap my head around some of the questions in that and see, is this true? Is this actually happening? Or is this just a fad? Too soon, and I'm too uneducated to actually have a say on that. But I think that, we see a lot of founders that are building things around that. And I'm sort of thinking, well, are you actually understanding what's going on, or are you sort of just jumping on a bandwagon? So those are questions that I'm also, trying to ask myself as I talk to founders too.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. And are there any common trends? So you mentioned like Web3 and the metaverse and all those kinds of things, but what are some of the trends that you're seeing in VC? And we can talk about it from either a sector perspective, like Web3 and metaverse and all those kinds of things, but also from a funding perspective. Like, are you seeing more funding, maybe more competition with micro VCs? Are you seeing more niche firms? Like, what are you seeing in terms of the general trends right now in the venture capital space?
Absolutely. I think this is something that as COVID has really accelerated some of the trends that we were already seeing a bit. So as I'm sure you're aware of the numbers, I mean, VC is really at an all-time high in terms of VC funding being poured into companies. There are funds really being raised every other day, almost. I mean, everybody and the mothers are raising funds now, which frankly, I think it's a good thing, because now it means that there is more competition, to your point, across micro and early stage funding. So just for your listeners, micro funds are anywhere sort of like between 10 million to 30 to kind of like 100. It would qualify as a pre-seed, seed round, seed funds. And so I think we see a lot more funds being raised now, and that means that there is founders can afford to be more competitive, and we're seeing this, right? Because I've talked to founders, every day, and one thing that I like to kind of like also understand is that who are your, what do you look for in an investor? And so most of them say, I really want to meet someone who either can help me achieve product market fit, can help me go from 0 to 1, can connect me to other people, can insert something that the founders need. So, and that all falls into that whole value add type of investor. So every founder that I'm talking to is looking for an investor that is going to be able to add value. So this whole idea of taking smart money couldn't be truer today. And so with that, because there is a lot more VCs out there is just more competition, and founder can afford to be more picky in who they want to take money from, which I think is a good thing. So I think that's number one. The second trend that we're seeing is around globally. Global VC also is at an all-time high. As I think we're seeing a lot more money being put into region that have been historically overlooked, and that's great news for someone like myself, who is from the continent in Africa, and I'm seeing a lot more money being put into businesses back home. So, obviously fintech is having a huge moment around, places like Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, and so forth. But I think even more in places that were not necessarily looked like Francophone Africa. I think we're seeing a lot more, American and British, European VCs going down there. And so that's really, really exciting. And the same can be applied in Southeast Asia and LATAM as well. And so I think that's great. We're seeing Tiger, SoftBank also very active in those regions. So I think it's great that we were able to put those regions back on the map. I think that's the second trend. And number 3 as well, and I think we're seeing that because we have a lot more money being poured, especially at the early stage. We are seeing valuation being a lot, to a certain extent, a lot higher than before. So some might argue that they're inflated. Some argue that they're very big for no reasons. And obviously that's because a lot of those mega funds and bigger funds, so borderline growth equity to PE, are actually looking a bit more at early stage, because they just really want to get access to deals much earlier, to get bigger allocation and having more of a say and more ownership at the very beginning. So because they're able to put more money, valuation can also are much higher. So I think that's one thing as well that I like to tell founders, that it's good that they are able to attract all those mega funds, but it's very important to also not be too greedy. So try to when you don't have a product, should your valuation really be 45 million pre? I mean, I don't know about that, but that really depends on the business, but something to really think about. So that's one thing as well, that little advice that I give out there, but ultimately time will tell us where we'll go with that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I wanted to touch on sort of the mechanics of investing nowadays as well, because as you mentioned, one thing is valuations going up, later stage investors coming in earlier on, but I've seen that rounds are very competitive as well. And so a lot of the deals I've been able to invest in are the result of, being part of networks, and they're like, hey, we're trying to fill out this round. And then I'm lucky to get allocation in there. But, it's a really competitive space right now. And if you don't get in early, you could get completely priced out and you're not part of the next Uber or whatever it is. And then, you kind of miss that train or that boat. But let's talk a bit about the mechanics of actually finding the deals, making sure that you get allocation, perhaps like some pro rata as well, where you can keep your allocation as you get bigger. How do you guys kind of think about that journey and that structure and making sure that you're going to have the exits you need to have a successful fund?
Absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, things are. It's a wild world out there. No, I mean, and I think it's very much it's both a hustle for founders, but also for fund managers to your point, get access to some of those great deals. of course, the dream of all VCs, I mean, maybe not all, but 99% of VCs would be to, have an Uber, Airbnb type of exit, obviously. The good thing is because we have a lot more founders coming out, there's a lot more resources in the ecosystem to basically help founders succeed. I'd like to think that the probability of also having the next Uber is a little higher than it used to be. That's my optimism kind of coming through. So that's number one. And so I think, there is room for everyone. So that's the number one piece. One thing that I've seen at Moxie, at least, is that Katie and Alex are two GPs. I've been in the Silicon Valley for many years. They've worked in some of the largest tech companies. They have, very, very strong network in the Bay Area, across the nation. I've been an East Coast kind of a girl, like for most of my career. So I've been plugged in that ecosystem. So together we've been able to actually combine both of our networks. So we do have quite a large network of deals and other investors. And I think it's going to sound really cheesy, but it also comes down to be a good person, being a person that is actually liked, to really be able to get access to good deals, because no other investors want to invest with someone who is not nice. I mean, you can have very, very nice track record, but if you're sufferable, trust me, you probably won't be number one on people's radar. So I think that's number one piece that I just kind of would like to put out there. It's a big industry, but it's also small in that sense. So kind of like having that reputation of just being a nice person, but also again being value add, someone that founders actually would feel proud to have on their cap table. I think that's really important. I think that I'd like to think that Moxie, I mean, I've seen Katie and Alex working with founders. They truly care. They've been operators themselves, so they really understand what it takes to actually build. So I think that's something that founders really appreciate. And because of that, our founders are able to recommend us to other founders who are looking to raise. So that's been really good. And I personally also try to do that, trying to really being able to also support other founders that I see, even if I might not invest. I'm like, how can I be helpful to you? And I know that that's something that VCs love to say, but truly, how can I be helpful? Is it a connection that you need? Do you need me to try as a user? What is it? Like, how can I help? So, because ultimately I think that startup are the backbone of our economy. So we are better off helping them. So I think that's the number one piece. Now, coming back to, how do we get access to deals? I think that's what I've just said is sort of like, it might answer some of that. Now, kind of like continuing, being able to follow on. I think that's become really tough. And a lot of seed investors have seen the value in maybe raising kind of like opportunity funds to be able to follow on, because as companies grow and grow bigger and have bigger valuation, to your point, maybe your seed funds might not actually afford those bigger deals. So it can be very beneficial or very strategic to actually build to actually raise another fund, an opportunity fund, and that comes back to, again, being back on the fundraising trail and do that. And, in fact, we're doing that at Moxie, and I've seen a lot of other VCs also thinking about raising another round to be able to invest in the follow-on rounds of existing companies in the portfolio, but also being able to invest in companies that they've seen in the ecosystem and maybe they were just too late to participate in the seed. So I think that's another way to kind of like get access to that. And again, being part of network, knowing, having a great network of other co-investors, but also, of founders, really hanging out where founders are, and around the pro rata. And I think it all comes down to negotiation, and that piece can be just what happens behind the scene is not always so pretty, but I think that's where it comes down to, being surrounded by, the right group of VCs that you actually trust, that you want to invest with. And I think that those conversations can be very, uncomfortable, but, happens what happens.
Yeah. No, I'd like to touch on those uncomfortable conversations as well, and negotiations. I've taken a class or two on negotiations and watched a couple of YouTube videos, so I might not be as good as most people, but what are some of the tips and tricks that you've learned about negotiating and making sure that you get allocation from a VC perspective, but then also any tips for the founders themselves in terms of negotiating the best deals and terms? Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard of founders either being completely diluted out, so when they exit, their equities worth almost nothing, or they're not able to negotiate good contracts with perhaps large customers like maybe the post office or whatever it is. But what have you learned about negotiating, and what are some of the tips and tricks that you could recommend from a VC and a founder perspective, and how to have good negotiations and manage those difficult conversations?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the negotiation piece, both with founders and other VCs, it really comes down to, what is your true value? So what is that you're actually trying to negotiate? Obviously better terms, but why? So if you truly believe that you are going to help that company go from that next stage because you bring X, Y, and Z, really putting that, on the table, that you are trying to, get access to those type of customers. Well, guess what? We have all of those in our network, and actually get you in front of those. We can specifically help you get X, Y, and Z. And so I think that that's really important when we talk to founders, that, here is what we can actually help you do. Like, you're trying to expand into the US market. We have a very strong network, both, maybe at the government level to help you with some of those like regulation and admin stuff that you need to get sorted, but also from a business perspective. Because ultimately, founders want to really be done with fundraising. Most founders hate fundraising. That's dirty little secret here. I don't think I've heard any founder actually saying that I'm really enjoying fundraising. But so they would really want to get out of the fundraising mode as soon as possible. So really thinking about, okay, let's actually, this is the game plan. Let's get you out of this phase, and let's actually get back into building, which is the most important thing. So that's around that. So how do we help you position yourself to be the greatest company out there? So that's really thinking about, what we have to bring at Moxie, even I as an investor, and also just the past. Like, in the past, I've been able to help you do X, Y, and Z. The past can predict what will happen in the future. So because I've done that, I've been, very helpful to you. And we try to kind of like also, like I said, we try to add value regardless of the process where we are. So I think that's really, that really kind of like gives an insight to founders as to what Moxie can actually, brings, what type of value we can actually bring. And also what the rest of the world is saying. I think coming back to being a nice person, because you founders will probably want to kind of like do their own due diligence. They talk to some of your portfolio company, what exactly, how have they been helpful to you? I think it's really good, and all of those to help us really work in our favor. When it comes to with other VCs and kind of like negotiating our terms, that could be obviously very difficult if you're working with someone who is particularly difficult, because there are people out there who are like that, and I think that in any industry that you are, that's just the nature of the world we live in. And I think sometimes it's painful, but maybe walking away is probably just your best bet, and just say like, hey, you know what, this at the end of the day, this is not worth our time, because most VCs also have other deals in the pipeline that they're looking at. So this is not a sole deal that we're trying to work on. Of course, we would love to make it work, but we also do have other deals that might actually be worth our time and energy to kind of like expand doing that. Because when we go through those negotiations, there's obviously lawyers being involved. There's all this time being spent, all this money being spent, and that's just time from us taken away from supporting our existing companies, but also other investments that also are looking, and it's also just not fair to spending all our energies on one specific deal. So I think that's one thing as well, that I think it's okay to kind of like it's painful, but I let it go. It's not meant to be.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm sure we could speak for hours, but we try and keep these episodes somewhat concise. We'll probably have to bring you in for another episode, but thank you so much for being on the show, Iynna. Yeah, how can people get in contact with you if they ever want to reach out? What's the best way for them to get in touch?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's very easy. It's my name, Iynna Halilou. And same with Twitter, very active on Twitter. Also my name, Iynna_Halilou. So, come find me there, and always very down to talk anything about, VC trends, Africa, what's happening, in the market now, anything unsexy tech, I love. So, just, hit me for that. So thank you so much for having me.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye.
Bye.